The twin moons of Proxima 6 cast an eerie blue glow over the barren landscape as Jack Freeman poked at his small campfire with a makeshift stick. 53 days since his research vessel had been caught in the gravitational pull of the wormhole. 53 days of rationing supplies, desperately trying to repair his communication array, and wondering if Earth even knew he was alive. "Happy birthday to me," Jack muttered, reaching into his emergency pack and pulling out his most treasured possession, the last vacuum-sealed burger from the ship's galley. The specially designed packaging had kept it preserved, a final taste of home that he'd been saving for this moment when his spirits needed it most. The flames illuminated his weathered face, once clean-shaven but now sporting a scraggly beard. His expedition uniform hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight subsisting on the strange purple tubers and stringy game he'd managed to trap. His scientific training had helped him determine what was poisonous and what was merely unpalatable, but nothing compared to proper Earth food. Jack unwrapped the burger reverently, inhaling the familiar scent of beef, cheese, and spices. His mouth watered instantly. He'd dreamed of this moment, planned exactly how he would savor each bite. Taking a deep breath, he raised the burger to his lips. A soft, rustling sound from beyond the light of his fire made him freeze. Jack's hand instinctively moved to the plasma cutter at his belt, not designed as a weapon, but the only protection he had on this strange world. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice rough from disuse. Communication with the native species had been minimal. They generally avoided him, watching from a distance with their large, luminescent eyes. The rustling grew closer, and then a figure emerged from the shadows. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Unlike the smaller, skittish natives he'd glimpsed before, this was a tall, humanoid female with radiant purple skin that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Silver eyes, large and almond-shaped, reflected the flames like mirrors. Her body was slender yet strong, covered partially by what appeared to be woven fibers in patterns that shifted as she moved. Her fingers, 6 on each hand, flexed nervously as she observed him. Jack remained still, his heart racing. This was the closest any native had come to him voluntarily. The alien's gaze fixed on the burger in his hands, her nostrils flaring slightly as she caught its scent. "Hello," Jack said softly, knowing his translator had been damaged in the crash. "I'm Jack. I'm not going to hurt you." The alien tilted her head, revealing an elegant neck adorned with what looked like naturally occurring bioluminescent patterns. She made a series of soft, clicking sounds, followed by a melodic hum that rose and fell like a question. Jack slowly pointed to himself. "Jack," he repeated, then gestured to her with an open palm. The alien seemed to understand. She placed 6 slender fingers against her chest and produced a sound that resembled Vexara, with tonal qualities beyond what human vocal cords could produce. "Vexara," Jack attempted, knowing he couldn't quite capture the resonance of her name. His pronunciation made her silver eyes widen slightly, the pupils expanding until they nearly eclipsed the metallic irises. Her attention returned to the burger, and Jack suddenly recognized the intensity in her gaze, hunger. Was she starving? The native fauna and flora seemed abundant enough, but perhaps she was ill or separated from her food source. Making a decision he knew might be foolish, Jack slowly tore off a portion of the burger, about a third of his precious last meal, and extended it toward her. Vexara hesitated, her luminous body tensing as though caught between caution and desire. Then, with surprising speed, she crossed the distance between them and accepted his offering with slender purple fingers. She examined the food curiously, bringing it to her face and inhaling deeply before taking a tentative bite. The effect was instantaneous and startling. The moment the earth food touched her tongue, Vexara's entire body seemed to pulse with light. The bioluminescent patterns across her skin flared brilliantly, and a shudder ran through her tall frame. She made a sound unlike anything Jack had heard before, part gasp, part musical note that seemed to resonate in his chest. Vexara devoured the rest of the burger piece in seconds, her movements becoming more fluid and deliberate. When she finished, her silver eyes locked onto Jack's with an intensity that made his mouth go dry. There was something in that gaze that transcended the species barrier, recognition, fascination, and something else that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. She stepped closer, now just feet away from where he sat. Her voice, when she spoke, had changed, deeper, more resonant, almost hypnotic in its cadence. "Delicious," she said, the Earth word somehow recognizable despite her alien vocal structure. "But this is not enough." Jack swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how much larger she was up close, at least 7 feet tall and powerfully built despite her slender appearance. She wasn't looking at the remaining burger in his hand. She was looking directly at him, her pupils fully dilated, the silver of her irises now just thin rings around deep black pools. "You want more food?" Jack asked uncertainly, gesturing to the remainder of his burger. Vexara knelt gracefully before him, bringing her face level with his. The scent of her was strange yet not unpleasant, like ozone and exotic flowers. Her 6-fingered hand reached out, not toward the food but toward his face, pausing just inches from his skin as though asking permission. "Want," she repeated, the word somehow both question and statement. "Want more, want, you." Jack's pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and something far more primal coursing through him. The alien woman's proximity sent waves of inexplicable heat through his body. Was this some effect of her biology, or was he responding to cues his conscious mind couldn't fully process? As her fingers finally made contact with his cheek, a tingling sensation spread across his skin. Jack knew he should be cautious, should probably back away, but the look in Vexara's eyes held him transfixed, predatory, certainly, but not threatening. She looked at him as though he were a puzzle she was desperate to solve, a treasure she had unexpectedly discovered. And despite the strangeness of it all, despite the danger of the unknown, Jack found himself leaning slightly into her touch, drawn by a curiosity that matched her own. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check. Vexara's touch lingered on Jack's face, her 6 fingers splayed across his stubbled cheek, sending waves of pleasant warmth through his skin. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, a gentle electrical current that seemed to map his nervous system from that single point of contact. "You different," she said, her command of English fragmentary but improving with each word as though she were extracting language directly from his mind. "Your taste, in food, in skin." Her silver eyes studied his reactions with scientific precision. Jack remained perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement might break this unprecedented moment of contact. His researcher's mind raced with questions even as his body responded to her proximity in ways that confused and intrigued him. "How can you speak my language?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vexara's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. "We learn through touch, through consumption." She glanced meaningfully at the remains of his burger. "Your food contains, information, chemistry." Jack's scientific curiosity momentarily overrode his caution. "You extracted information about me, about humans, from eating our food." She nodded, the movement surprisingly human. "My people, varying, we absorb knowledge, connection." Her fingers moved slightly against his cheek. "Your burger had traces, DNA, microbiome, memory chemicals." The implications were staggering. Jack's mind flashed to his university days, to theories about alien biology and chemical communication that his professors had dismissed as speculative. The variant apparently absorbed information at a molecular level, extracting data from anything they consumed. "Is that why you're looking at me like that?" Jack asked, suddenly aware of how her pupils had remained dilated, how her body seemed oriented toward his like a compass finding north. Vexara's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Your chemistry, compatible, rare, very rare." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his face. "Want to know more?" Jack's heart hammered in his chest. Despite his scientific training, despite the voice of caution screaming in the back of his mind, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward this alien woman. Her presence awakened something primal in him, curiosity, certainly, but also a deep-seated attraction that defied rational explanation. "More burger," he offered lamely, holding up what remained of his last Earth meal. Vexara made a sound that might have been laughter, musical and resonant. "Yes, and more. You." Before Jack could respond, she took the burger from his hand, her fingers brushing his in a touch that sent another jolt of that strange, pleasant energy through him. Then, to his surprise, she tore the remaining portion in half and offered part back to him. "Share," she said, her silver eyes intense. "Important ritual for my people." Jack hesitated only briefly before accepting the offered food. As they both bit into their portions simultaneously, he was struck by the intimacy of the moment. This strange communion under alien moons with a creature whose biology and culture were utterly foreign to him. The moment Vexara finished her portion, Her bioluminescence flared dramatically, patterns racing across her purple skin in complex sequences. She closed her eyes, her face a mask of concentration or pleasure. Jack couldn't tell which. "I feel you," she said, opening her eyes to reveal irises that now had flecks of brown within the silver, a color remarkably similar to his own eyes. "Your world, oceans, cities, memories." Jack swallowed the last of his burger, wondering what effect, if any, the shared meal might have on him. He felt warmer, certainly, and strangely alert, but nothing as dramatic as Vexara's reaction. "What exactly is happening?" he asked, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his apprehension. "Bond beginning," she explained, moving to sit beside him rather than across from him. Her height and the elegant alienness of her movements made the simple action appear graceful. "My people form connections through consumption, through shared molecules we become attuned." "Attuned," Jack repeated, increasingly aware of her scent, which seemed to be changing subtly, becoming more attractive to him with each passing moment. "Yes," Vexara reached for his hand, intertwining her 6 fingers with his 5 in a gesture that should have felt awkward but somehow didn't. "Soon I will sense your needs, your wants, your hungers." The way she said that last word sent a shiver down Jack's spine. There was a promise in it, something both thrilling and terrifying. "And what about me?" he asked. "Will I sense yours too?" Vexara tilted her head, considering. "Possible, no human has, shared with Varine before, you might feel connection, might not." Her free hand reached up to trace the outline of his face. "But I will feel everything." The intensity of her gaze made Jack's breath catch. The rational part of his mind knew he should proceed with caution. He was alone on an alien world, forming an unprecedented bond with a species he knew almost nothing about. But another part of him, a part that had always driven him to explore the unknown, to push boundaries, urged him forward into this strange new territory. "Will it hurt?" he asked, immediately feeling foolish for the childlike question. Vexara's expression softened. No hurt, only awareness heightened. Her hand moved from his face to his chest, resting over his heart. "Your heart fast, afraid, excited." "Both," Jack admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Good balance," she replied with another almost smile. "Fear keeps safe, excitement brings discovery." As they sat together by the dying embers of his fire, Jack became aware of subtle changes in his perception. The night sounds of Proxima 6 seemed clearer, the sense of the alien landscape more distinct. And Vexara herself appeared different, still undeniably alien, but somehow familiar in ways he couldn't articulate. "What happens now?" he asked, suddenly aware that they were miles from any settlement, alone in the wilderness of an alien world. Vexara stood in one fluid motion, pulling him effortlessly to his feet with her. Standing face to face, her height advantage was more pronounced, but it didn't feel threatening. Instead, there was something oddly protective in her posture. "Now," she said, "I take you to my dwelling, safer than here. Predators come at third moonrise." She gestured to the horizon where, indeed, a third, smaller moon was beginning its ascent. "And then," Jack pressed, needing to understand what he was walking into. Vexara's bioluminescence pulsed once, brightly, illuminating the space between them like a flash of silent lightning. "Then," she said, her voice dropping to that resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through his bones, "we explore. Hunger, your kind, my kind." Her free hand moved to rest at the junction of his neck and shoulder, thumb tracing his collarbone through his uniform. "Many kinds of hunger, Jack Freeman." The use of his full name, which he had never told her, made his eyes widen in surprise. Whatever connection they had begun to form, it clearly went deeper than he had imagined. As Vexara led him away from the campsite and into the alien night, Jack knew he was crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. But the scientist in him, the explorer, couldn't turn back now. He had come to Proxima 6 seeking knowledge about alien life. He had never imagined becoming part of that knowledge himself. Behind them, the remains of his last Earth meal lay forgotten, the empty wrapper carried away by the alien. The journey to Vexara's dwelling took them through a landscape that transformed under the light of 3 moons. Bioluminescent vegetation pulsed in synchronicity with the celestial bodies overhead, creating pathways of ghostly blue light. Jack noticed that some plants seemed to respond to Vexara's presence, brightening as she passed, an effect he might have missed if his senses hadn't been unusually heightened. "Your people can communicate with plants?" he asked, watching as a fern-like growth unfurled toward her. Not communicate, Vexara corrected, her English continuing to improve with remarkable speed. Resonance, shared frequencies, she gestured to the patterns on her skin. All life here connected by vibration, energy. Jack was beginning to understand that the Varine existed in a constant state of biochemical exchange with their environment, sensing, absorbing, and transmitting information in ways human physiology couldn't replicate. Yet somehow, through their shared meal, he was experiencing a shadow of this awareness. I can feel it, he admitted, surprised by his own sensitivity. It's like background music I never noticed before. Vexara's expression brightened. You adapt quickly, unusual. Her hand tightened around his. Special. They crested a small ridge, and Jack stopped in his tracks. Below them lay a cluster of structures unlike anything in human architecture, organic-looking dwellings that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being built upon it. Soft light emanated from within these living buildings, and moving among them were dozens of Varine, their purple skin in varying shades, their bioluminescent patterns creating a symphony of light. Your home, Jack whispered, overwhelmed by the beauty of the settlement. My clan nest, Vexara confirmed, one of many Varine gatherings on this world. She tugged gently at his hand. Come, but stay close. No outsider has entered in many generations. As they descended toward the settlement, Jack became acutely aware of the intensity of Vexara's grip, the possessiveness in her posture. The bond between them, whatever its exact nature, was clearly significant to her. The reaction from the other Varine was immediate. Activity ceased as they approached, all eyes turning to observe the alien in their midst. Jack felt waves of emotion radiating from the gathered aliens, curiosity, concern, and in some cases, what felt distinctly like disapproval. An older Varine stepped forward, distinguishable by the complex, intricate patterns covering most of their visible skin. They addressed Vexara in their native tongue, a series of melodic tones and clicks that Jack couldn't hope to understand. Vexara responded, gesturing repeatedly toward Jack. The conversation grew heated, other Varine joining in until the air vibrated with their resonant voices. What's happening? Jack whispered. Vexara turned to him, her silver eyes troubled. They sense our beginning bond. Elder Moxer says is forbidden, says your chemistry too unknown, dangerous. Is it dangerous? Jack asked, suddenly concerned. Vexara's expression softened as she looked at him. Not dangerous, rare, precious. She turned back to the elder, speaking again in her native tongue, this time with greater intensity. The elder Varine's disapproval was palpable, but after a lengthy exchange, they made a gesture that seemed to indicate reluctant permission. The gathered crowd dispersed slowly, many casting backward glances at the strange pair. They allow you to stay, Vexara explained as she led him toward one of the smaller dwellings at the edge of the settlement. For study, for observation, not for joining. Joining, Jack repeated, sensing layers of meaning in the word. Vexara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she led him into her dwelling, a space that defied easy description. The interior was a single room with walls that seemed alive, gently pulsing with bioluminescence that responded to their presence. Furniture was minimal and organic, appearing to have grown from the floor rather than being constructed. Once inside, Vexara sealed the entrance with a gesture, the living material of the dwelling responding to her touch. When she turned to face him, her expression had changed, more intense, more focused. Joining, she repeated, stepping closer to him. My people bond through progressive stages, first taste. She touched her lips, referring to their shared meal. Then resonance. Her hand moved to her chest, where Jack imagined her heart might be. Then joining, complete exchange. The implications weren't lost on Jack. You mean intimacy? More than your concept of intimacy, Vexara explained, her voice lowering to that resonant tone that sent vibrations through him. Complete biochemical integration, temporary merging of nervous systems, profound. Jack swallowed hard, equal parts fascinated and intimidated. And that's what the elders don't want us to do. Yes, Vexara moved closer still, the scent of her overwhelming his senses. They fear unknown reactions. No human and Varine have joined before. Would it be dangerous? Jack asked, torn between scientific curiosity and self-preservation. Vexara's six-fingered hand came to rest over his heart again. Unknown, but I feel your compatibility, sense it growing stronger. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "You feel it too." She was right. Since their shared meal, Jack had felt an escalating awareness of her, not just physically, but on some deeper level. He could sense her emotions, catch fragments of her thoughts like half-heard whispers. "I do," he admitted. "It's like nothing I've experienced before." "The bond forms regardless of permission," Vexara said, her tone almost apologetic. "Once begun, difficult to stop, grows stronger with proximity." She guided him to what appeared to be a resting area, a contoured surface that adjusted its shape as they sat upon it. Jack was acutely aware of her body next to his, the heat radiating from her purple skin, the subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from her core. "I should study you properly," she said, switching suddenly to a more scientific tone. "Learn your biology, your needs." Jack couldn't help but smile at her attempt at professional distance, even as her body language conveyed something entirely different. "You're a scientist." "Xenobiologist," she confirmed with evident pride. "Study life forms from other worlds, none so complex as you before." Her fingers traced the contours of his face again, but this time the touch felt more analytical. "Your species fascinating, so adaptive, so varied." "And you extracted all this knowledge from a burger?" Jack asked, half-jokingly. Vexara's expression became serious. "Not just burger, you." Her hand moved to the nape of his neck, fingers tangling in his hair. "Connection grows, I sense more each moment, your thoughts, your desires." The way she said that last word made Jack's breath catch. There was no denying the direction this strange relationship was heading, a fact that both thrilled and terrified him. "What if the elders are right?" he asked, forcing himself to consider the rational concerns. "What if joining is dangerous for one or both of us?" Vexara's bioluminescence dimmed slightly, her expression somber. "Choice still remains. Bond does not force, only encourages." Her eyes met his, the silver now distinctly flecked with brown. "But truth is, I already hunger for joining with you, unprecedented, overwhelming." Jack felt it too, a pull toward her that transcended physical attraction, a desire to know her completely, to experience this alien connection in its fullest form. Yet caution kept him grounded. "We should take this slowly," he said, though it took considerable willpower to form the words. "Learn more about each other first." Vexara nodded, though the pulsing of her skin betrayed her disappointment. "Wise, patient," she smiled, the expression becoming more natural on her alien features. "We have time." As she spoke, a distant alarm-like sound echoed through the settlement. Vexara stiffened, her head turning toward the source of the noise. "What is it?" Jack asked, sensing her sudden tension. "Council gathering," she said, standing abruptly. "Elder Moxer calls all varying unusual at night cycle," her expression darkened. "About you must be." The implications were clear. The elders were not simply going to accept his presence without further discussion. Whatever was developing between him and Vexara had implications beyond their personal connection. "What will happen?" he asked. Vexara's answer was interrupted by a sharp rapping on the dwelling's entrance. She made a quick gesture, and the living door parted to reveal two tall Varine with elaborate patterns that Jack hadn't seen before. Their stance and demeanor conveyed authority. They spoke rapidly to Vexara, whose posture became increasingly defensive. When she responded, her tone was almost challenging. After a tense exchange, she turned to Jack, her expression grave. "They summon us both. Council will decide your fate." She reached for his hand, gripping it firmly. "Whatever happens, stay close to me." As they prepared to face the Varine Council, Jack realized that their personal connection had rapidly evolved into something with profound diplomatic implications. He was no longer just a stranded human exploring an alien bond. He had become the first official human contact with a species whose biology and culture operated on principles Earth science had barely imagined. The stakes had just gotten considerable. The Varine Council chamber was a vast, dome-shaped structure at the center of the settlement. Unlike the other buildings, this one pulsed with multiple colors of bioluminescence, purples, blues, and silvers creating patterns that seemed to Jack to be a form of communication in itself. Dozens of Varine had assembled, arranged in concentric circles around a central platform where Elder Moxer stood with four other elders, their elaborate skin patterns marking them as the highest authorities. Jack felt the weight of countless silver eyes upon him as Vexara led him forward, her grip on his hand almost painfully tight. "Remember," she whispered, "they sense emotions, show respect, not fear." Jack nodded, drawing on his training as a researcher to maintain composure. This was first contact in its purest form, a moment that should have been preceded by years of preparation and diplomatic protocols. Instead, it hinged entirely on whatever bond was forming between him and Vexara. Elder Moxer addressed the assembly first, their resonant voice filling the chamber without seeming to raise in volume, a property of varying physiology that Jack found fascinating despite the tension of the moment. Vexara translated in hushed tones. "They speak of ancient laws, of separation between species, of dangers in mixing biochemistries across stars." The elder gestured toward Jack repeatedly, the movements becoming more agitated. The assembly responded with a collective sound, part hum, part clicking, that raised the hair on Jack's arms. "What are they saying now?" he whispered. Vexara's expression darkened. "They cite the toxicity protocols, say your presence contaminates clan nest, say our bond threatens purity of varying biochemical sovereignty." As the elder continued, Jack became aware of a change in the atmosphere of the chamber. The originally curious gazes of the assembled Varian were hardening, becoming hostile. He could almost feel the shift in their collective mood, another effect of his heightened sensitivity since bonding with Vexara. When Moxer finally fell silent, Vexara stepped forward, pulling Jack gently with her. She addressed the council in her own language, her voice firm and clear. Jack didn't need a translation to recognize a passionate defense when he heard one. The exchange grew heated, with other Varian joining in, until the chamber filled with a cacophony of their musical language. Jack noticed Vexara's bioluminescent patterns flaring with what he now recognized as emotion, defiance, frustration, and something deeper, more protective. Suddenly, a younger Varian burst into the chamber, interrupting the proceedings. They spoke rapidly to Elder Moxer, whose reaction was immediate and alarming. Their patterns flashed in what Jack interpreted as warning or danger. "What's happening?" Jack asked as murmurs spread through the assembly. "Orbital sensors detected ship," Vexara explained quickly, her expression grave. "Approaching planet, human ship." Jack's heart leaped. Rescue? After nearly 2 months stranded, had Earth finally traced his emergency beacon? "That's good news," he said, but Vexara's expression didn't mirror his relief. "Not good," she countered. "Council believes you signaled them, believes invasion begins." The absurdity of the accusation might have made Jack laugh under different circumstances. His emergency beacon was barely powerful enough to reach orbit, let alone transmit interstellar distress calls. "That's impossible," he protested. "I couldn't have." But his words were cut short as Elder Moxer issued what was clearly a command. 2 large Varians stepped forward, moving toward Jack and Vexara with purpose. "What's happening?" Jack asked, tension coiling in his muscles. "Detainment order," Vexara hissed, pulling him backward toward the chamber entrance. "They will separate us, study you, prepare defenses against your people." "We have to explain," Jack began, but Vexara cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No time, counsel in defense posture now, will not listen." Her eyes locked with his, intense and urgent. "Must flee now." Before Jack could respond, Vexara emitted a sudden, brilliant flash from her bioluminescent patterns, so bright it momentarily blinded everyone in the chamber. In the resulting confusion, she pulled him toward a side exit, moving with speed that Jack struggled to match. They burst out of the council chamber into the night, where chaos had already taken hold of the settlement. Varian moved in all directions, gathering young ones, collecting supplies, preparing what appeared to be defensive positions. "This way," Vexara urged, leading him away from the main pathways toward the dense vegetation at the settlement's edge. "No safe place, hidden." As they ran, Jack became aware of sounds behind them, pursuers. The bond between him and Vexara seemed to strengthen with the surge of adrenaline, granting him speed and endurance beyond his normal capacity. He felt her determination flowing into him, her knowledge of the terrain guiding his steps. They plunged into the jungle-like growth, following a path only Vexara could see. The 3 moons provided scattered illumination through the canopy, supplemented by Vexara's own muted glow as she led them deeper into the wilderness. After what felt like hours of flight, though Jack's internal clock suggested it was less than one, Vexara finally slowed their pace. They had reached a small clearing dominated by a massive tree-like growth with phosphorescent leaves. At its base was an opening, barely visible among the twisted roots. "Here," she said, guiding him toward the gap. "Cave system, used for adolescent isolation rituals, few no entrance." Jack ducked into the opening, finding himself in a narrow tunnel that quickly opened into a larger chamber. Vexara followed, her bioluminescence providing soft illumination as she sealed the entrance behind them by shifting several root structures. The chamber was small but not uncomfortable, with a floor covered in what felt like soft moss. The walls were embedded with crystal-like formations that reflected Vexara's light, amplifying the illumination. "Safe for now," she said, though her posture remained alert. "Pursuits must organize before entering deep forest, and ship in orbit distracts them." "Vexara," Jack said, catching his breath, "if that's a human ship, they're not invaders. They're probably looking for me." She studied him, her expression skeptical. "How find you? Beacon weak, you said." "Yes, but Earth has been establishing a network of relay satellites throughout this sector." Jack ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "If my signal reached even one relay, they could have triangulated my position." Vexara processed this information, her bioluminescence pulsing in thought patterns. "Council will not believe. Too convenient timing." "We need to contact them," Jack insisted. "Explain that this is all a misunderstanding." "Impossible now," Vexara countered. "Council enacted isolation protocol, all communication arrays locked to elder access only." Jack paced the small chamber, frustration building. What had begun as a simple act of sharing food had somehow escalated into a potential interspecies conflict. The stakes were no longer just about his survival or his connection with Vexara. They now involved the first official contact between humanity and the Varine, beginning under the worst possible circumstances. He turned to face Vexara, only to find her much closer than expected. In the confined space of the chamber, her presence was overwhelming. Her scent, the heat of her body, the pulse of her bioluminescence all seeming to intensify. "Vexara," he began, intending to discuss their next steps, but the words died in his throat as he saw her expression. Her pupils were fully dilated again, the silver of her irises reduced to thin rings around depthless black. The patterns on her skin pulsed in rapid, complex sequences that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. "Bond strengthening," she said, her voice dropping to that resonant tone that vibrated through him. "Danger accelerates process, ancient survival mechanism." Jack could feel it too, a heightening of the connection that had been building between them since they shared his burger. Every sense was amplified, and his awareness of Vexara had become almost painfully acute. He could feel her emotions as clearly as his own, fear, concern, and beneath those, a powerful, primal desire. "The joining," he whispered, understanding dawning. "It's happening anyway." "Yes," Vexara moved closer still until barely inches separated them. "Crisis triggers evolutionary response. Bodies seek maximum connection for survival advantage." Her six-fingered hand came to rest over his heart. "Can resist, should resist, but difficult." Jack knew she was right. They should focus on the immediate dangers, on finding a way to prevent misunderstanding between their species. But the pull between them had become nearly irresistible, a gravitational force as powerful as the one that had originally drawn his ship to this world. "What happens if we join?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What exactly does it involve?" Vexara's hand moved from his heart to his face, cupping his cheek in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Biochemical exchange, nervous systems temporarily link, share sensations, memories, knowledge." Her voice dropped lower. "Intense pleasure, profound understanding, temporary transformation." "Transformation," Jack repeated, both alarmed and intrigued. "Your body adapts, my body adapts, meet in middle." Her thumb traced his lips. "Temporary changes, few hours only, but significant." In him was fascinated by the implications, a form of intimacy that actually altered biology, that created a true meeting of different species. The human in him was terrified, and undeniably. "Is it safe?" he asked, the question seeming inadequate for the magnitude of what she described. "Unknown," Vexara admitted, "but bond already formed cannot be broken, will grow painful if resisted too long." Her patterns pulsed faster. "Already feel discomfort." She was right again. Beneath the desire was a growing sense of physical discomfort, a yearning that went beyond emotional or sexual need, something his body seemed to require at a cellular level. Yes, he admitted, it's like withdrawal. Same for me, Vexara said, worse with each passing moment. Her hands moved to his shoulders, the touch sending jolts of that now familiar energy through him. Choice is yours, Jack Freeman. Join with me willingly or suffer separation sickness. Either way, we must decide quickly. Pursuers will find us eventually. Jack knew that the rational choice would be to resist, to focus on their survival and on preventing conflict between their species. But the connection that had begun with a shared meal had progressed far beyond his control. His body, his mind, and something deeper still all cried out for completion of the bond that had formed between them. In that moment, suspended between two worlds, between reason and instinct, Jack made his choice. He stepped forward, closing the last distance between them, and brought his hands to Vexara's face, mirroring her gesture. "Show me," he said simply. "Show me how to join with you." Vexara's bioluminescence flared brilliant silver, illuminating the chamber like moonlight as she drew him into an embrace that would forever change them both. Jack awoke to the gentle pulse of bioluminescence against his eyelids. He looked down at his arms, surprised to see a faint purple glow emanating from his skin, one of many temporary physical changes from his joining with Vexara. The experience had been beyond words. Their bodies had transformed, meeting between human and varying physiology, but more profound was the mental connection. Memories, knowledge, and sensations flowing between them until the boundaries of their separate consciousnesses blurred. "You're awake," Vexara said, her silver eyes meeting his. Through their bond, he felt her wonder at what they had shared. "That was incredible," Jack said inadequately. "The joining is always profound, but this," she touched his face, "unprecedented, perfect compatibility." Jack understood now. He knew the varying language, could read their bioluminescent patterns, and comprehended their history. Most importantly, he understood their fears about interspecies contact. "The ship," Jack said suddenly, knowledge flowing from their shared consciousness. "I know how to contact them." "How?" Vexara asked. "The wildlife observation stations throughout the forest. They transmit data but aren't locked under the isolation protocol." Jack gathered his possessions. "We can repurpose one to send a message." They reached the observation post before dawn, quickly adapting it to transmit a simple message to the orbiting Earth ship. Identity confirmation, coordinates, and a request for peaceful contact. The response came quickly. A shuttle would descend at dawn. As the first light broke over the horizon, Jack and Vexara stood hand in hand in a small clearing, watching the approaching shuttle. Simultaneously, they heard the varying search party drawing near. "Perfect timing," Jack said with unexpected calm. "Let them see that first contact doesn't have to mean conflict." The shuttle landed as Elder Moxer and several Varine emerged from the forest. Jack and Vexara stood between the two groups, literal bridges between worlds. "Captain Rivera," Jack called to the expedition leader. "I'm Commander Jack Freeman. This is Vexara of the Varine. We come in peace and we request formal diplomatic contact." Captain Rivera removed her helmet, a profound gesture of trust. "I am Captain Elena Rivera of the Earth Science vessel Horizon. We come with peaceful intent." Elder Moxer responded with a formal greeting gesture. "I am Elder Moxer of the Varine Central Council. We are cautious of outsiders but willing to speak." As the leaders began a tentative dialogue, Vexara's thoughts flowed directly into Jack's mind. What happens to us now? Jack stepped forward, still holding Vexara's hand. "Captain Rivera, Elder Moxer, what you see before you is more than just two individuals. Through a biological process unique to the Varine, Vexara, and I have formed a permanent bond that allows complete understanding across our species barrier. We propose to serve as official intermediaries between humanity and the Varine," he continued. "Not belonging fully to either world anymore, we can bridge both." The negotiations lasted days. The human expedition established a base near the Varine settlement, and scientists from both species cautiously began to exchange knowledge, with Jack and Vexara as the crucial link between them. 1 month later, Jack stood with Vexara overlooking the joint research station, a symbol of cooperation between their species. "The Horizon leaves tomorrow," Jack said. "Last chance to change your mind about Earth. Vexara's 6 fingers interlaced with his 5. My place is here where our worlds meet, as is yours. The decision to remain on Proxima 6 as humanity's first ambassador to the Varine had been surprisingly easy. Earth held nothing for him that could compare to the connection he'd found here. Do you ever regret it, he asked, sharing that burger with a strange alien? Vexara's bioluminescence pulsed with amusement. Never. As the sun set, they walked toward their shared dwelling, a structure that combined elements of both their architectural traditions, just as they themselves combined elements of both their species. What had begun with the simple sharing of food had culminated in the sharing of everything: knowledge, experience, consciousness itself. In that sharing, they had discovered that the greatest hunger, regardless of species, was not for food or physical connection, but for understanding, for the rare experience of being truly known